Round 12 is in the books, and I don't think it could be described any better than it was by our own Peter Doggers to headline the Round 12 news report when he said that we have reached the decisive phase. A great report with tons of pictures from on site, of course, but I think the biggest storyline obviously being that Sergey Karjakin was able to win after losing a very tough game to Vishy Anand, and it seems the pattern repeats that once you get on top, it's hard to stay there. As we saw Sergey bounce right back there and Vishy lose a huge game to Hikaru Nakamura. And because I know you guys watch all my videos, you know that I was sort of foreshadowing that might not be a given, that Vishy was going to be just fine against Hikaru in the end of the last video, talking about the fact that Hikaru has an excellent score against Anand, and with the white pieces, I'm not really surprised about what happened today. A huge win for Nakamura over Vishy, and after that, of course, we had the other games wrap up with Fabiano Caruana unable to get a win and stay in the clear lead against Aronian. And in all fairness, he was actually under a lot of pressure against the Armenian. And finally, the artist is at it again, drawing this time still a little bit better, still unable to convert on any kind of advantage against Peter Svidler. And so as we take a quick look at all the pairings that I have just described, you guys know the drill. There really shouldn't be much more delay. Let's jump right into the games, starting right at the top in the game between Fabiano Caruana and Levon Aronian. We had e4, maybe to the surprise of some, instead of d4, but I really wasn't that surprised. We had a Lopez inviting the Berlin, but I think they've had enough of trying the Berlin and going up against a very well-prepared anti-Berlin, as we've seen both Fabiano and Vishy, I think, do as well as white against the Berlin as anybody. And so Levon decides to play the mainline Spanish, and after castles, bishop e7, we would have been headed right there, of course, if we had seen the move rook to e1, and then you might get some real classical Spanish that we never see anymore, right, bringing us back to the days of Bobby Fischer. But no, d3 was played, and after b5, bishop to b3, again with knight to c3, if you remember, we've also seen this position already played a couple times where Anand played a4 against Svidler and won that very, very nice game after bishop to b7. Of course, the next time a4 was played, though, by Topalov, Svidler played b4, and still white got an edge. But here we see something new, knight to c3, and that's always fun. After d6, a3, knight a5, bishop a2, we're in for a pretty typical Spanish. And now, rather than the move c5, which is a move you expect black to play in a lot of these closed, semi-closed Lopezes, because, of course, it increases pressure in the center and put the queen there. But you don't see that here because with the knight on c3, white is in less of a position to advance the center in the way that you normally expect white to do in the Lopez, right? Play c3 and d4. So black doesn't need to extend the c-pawn in that way. Instead, bishop to e6 is played, and now after b4, we have our first deviation from the game between Fabiano Caruana and Levon Aronian from the 2014 Sinkfield Cup. Of course, everyone remembers that tournament as being one of the most legendary performances by any chess player of all time when Fabiano started 7-0. But Caruana decides not to repeat with the move bishop takes e6, and instead plays our move b4, and here we go. Bishop takes a2, rook takes a2, and knight to c6. After bishop to g5, knight to d7, we have pretty typical stuff. Aronian actually had this exact position as black against Anand, so it wasn't the first time that he's played for these ideas before. So maybe he anticipated that Caruana had something up his sleeve, but we don't know exactly, of course. In this exact position with Anand, he actually played the move queen to d7, and perhaps that's why he didn't play queen d7 here, because he anticipated that Caruana had something up his sleeve. So he plays the knight retreat, but this is still typical. If you're wondering what the plan is, of course, black would look for opportunities to expand on the king side. The move f5 will be a typical move whenever you have potential for space over there. So knight to d7 makes sense from that perspective, and white not wanting to trade because white has more space. Why trade and make it easier for these pieces that are all sort of wrestling over just two squares? Nope, you want to keep that piece on the board, and that's what he does. And after knight f6, it's sort of a draw offer, right? He offers a draw. Of course, Caruana is not going to go back to g5, but instead plays queen to b1, which has pretty clear intentions, and it's important to understand why white still has a little bit of an edge in these middle games. The space on the queen side is seemingly symmetrical, especially to the unexperienced or the inexperienced eye looking at these Spanish positions. But it still favors white from the perspective that black has a much harder time mobilizing a5 than white does mobilizing a4. And whenever you have symmetrical pawns, the first person to bring tension to the lead pawn can often build on that tension, kind of like water hitting a dam. And that makes it difficult for the other player. I'll give you an example of that structure, because that pawn structure sort of motif, because you know I love educational opportunities for everyone. Like, let's say something, rook e8 or something silly is played that doesn't challenge the position as black needs to do. After a4, white holds all the cards. Again, when you're the first person to put pressure on the leading pawn in a symmetrical structure, these are the pro tips you can be writing down, you can often hold the cards, because if they take, they're almost always weakening whatever pawn was behind that lead pawn, and you're usually getting the pressure first. Of course, there could be exceptions. Maybe black has 1.5 million pieces on b4, but most likely it's not the case. If they don't take it, well, you're gonna build up on that pressure, and now they're stuck to defending that pawn for the rest of their life. And in this case, there isn't even the option to push, but even if they could, often that's also a concession of square control. So it's a good thing to understand that is a plan that white wants to play for, and it's exactly why black needs to strike with d5 in the center, immediately as Aronian does. Now, after bishop to g5, d4, takes f6, we get our first sort of weirdness in the position. The imbalance occurs after black chooses to take on c3 rather than playing the obvious recapture on f6. Aronian was worried about the move knight to d5, as was analyzed in the post-game conference, and after queen to d6, rook to c1, he felt that white was sort of holding the cards. It's not easy for black to get the plans that he wants, and white wants to play c4 and clearly mobilize pieces on the queen side. It's not exactly clear, though. Black can actually play the move a5 now, and here everything I just said about white being the first one to put pressure on a symmetrical structure, black is able to do it because white has moved the knight, right? So I think after a5, the position is still roughly equal. White probably holds an edge if you can still mobilize c3 and use the c-file, so it's understandable that Aronian didn't want to allow this, but it doesn't mean that d takes c3 is necessarily the best thing for black either. After bishop takes e5, black is officially sacrificing a pawn in the hopes that his dark square control is going to amount to something. But if you're in the Fabiano camp, you had to be feeling good about his chances here, right? He's white. He's in the lead of the tournament. He just won a pawn, and I don't see any concrete weaknesses to go with it. So felt like Fabiano maybe should have won this game. And other than scenarios you can imagine where the pieces on the queen side get a little bit misplaced, seems like Fabiano's on track. Queen to d6, and now Fabiano played knight to g4. As it was said afterwards, it's not that clear where that knight should go. Fabiano chose the route that comes to e3 in hopes of these squares here. Possibly knight f3 was better. It doesn't have the same intentions for the knight, but it does have intentions to mobilize the center. And after a5, rook a1, queen e6, knight to d4 can be played because the square was given up. And then the knight finds its way to f5 anyway, and after bishop f6, it's probably white's better, and they say it wasn't clear how white's making progress, but I personally would have preferred this line for white. I would even play the move queen to b3 here. If you want to play a4, fine. Now you've really lost potential for counterplay. I'll back up and relocate all my pieces to this side of the board and use my pawns. If you don't, then I'm going to bring the rook over and still try to advance d4. So again, I'm not sure all the moves are forced here, but Robert Hess provided analysis, and then of course me and the Lizard jumped together. We were a team and sort of checked all that. I feel like white would have been better, and maybe a more straightforward plan with the move knight f3. Knight g4 seemed not necessarily dubious, but a little awkward to me. After a5, the knight does come to e3, but once c6 is played, both d5 and c4 are keeping the pony at bay, and all of a sudden I like black's compensation a little more than it would have happened in the other line. Fabiano decides he doesn't want to sit on the position. If he had played knight f5, a quick line to be aware of is that a big trade and then rook a1 is probably still a little bit better for white, but without any minor pieces on the board, maybe Fabiano didn't feel like his winning chances were very good. So instead, he decides to play the move a4. As we see, it's time to get messy. Takes b4, takes here, and now I get my knight to d5. So if you're Caruana, you're happy, right? This pony looks pretty strong. I've also closed up the counterplay with the queen coming here. So I was still feeling pretty good about White's chances in this position. After rook f to b8, though, he took, and by no means is this a bad move, but I actually feel like it fell into a mistake that I criticized Fabiano for early in the tournament, a voluntary exchange in a position where I just don't see it as being a forced idea. I'm still confused as to why queen to b3, followed by ganging up on the a file, wasn't something that seemed more attractive to White. I'm not exactly sure. Again, we know I'm not a scientist. I do stay at Holiday Inn Expresses on occasion, but normally it leads to screaming in the other room by by people on the same floor. Just, that's why I stopped staying there, right? Getting smarter, bad night's sleeps. You make the trade-off. So anyway, but in all seriousness, I'm not a really huge supporter of this move, and I think that because Fabiano was looking for positions where he could play for 2 results, right? A safe way to play for a win, and maybe I get a draw. I feel like he had a little bit of that mindset with this move, and that almost got him in trouble. So I think this game, if he ends up not winning the candidates, will come back as a game that he wishes he had tried for a little bit more. So we get these moves, and Fabiano goes for the a file as I wish he had done with the pony still on the board. But suddenly, actually, after rook d8, h3, g6, queen to b3, and then rook to d4, the position's starting to look harder and harder for White, right? Black is anchoring in on these points, and maybe Black can start to flip the script over here and get some counterplay. Well, that's exactly what happened here. After some tickle with the kings, Fabiano decides I'm not afraid to be aggressive by bringing my king in, but watch as Aronian swings the queen to the other side of the board, hitting the h2 square, and suddenly White is worried, right? He plays the move rook a1, sort of calling the bluff of this move that it might be met by rook a7, and then Bob's your uncle or your father on f7, as I saw a YouTube commenter make. That's right, I pay attention. But after queen to c5, stopping rook a7, rook to b1, queen a7, it's clear that Black is really in no danger of losing here. So if Fabiano wanted 2 results to play for, Black is sort of the one that ended up getting that opportunity. White has no way to get control of the a file unless Black wants to go for some sort of riskiness. After king e2, Black played g5, and you can tell that Aronian was feeling good. Otherwise, why are you expanding, trying to gain space and maybe threats of g4? Rook a1, queen e7, still keeping an eye on a7, queen to c7, rook a8, and finally he decides it's time to risk it, pointing out that if you play rook a7, for 1, I can give check in here, and I have at the very least a draw, assuming I don't checkmate you, right? And 2, you're not even threatening anything on f7 because my queen guards it, so maybe I can play g4 and continue to put pressure on the position that way. Fabiano decided he agreed with Aronian and panicked, bringing the rook back, but here comes g4 anyway. And just look at the position. White is up a pawn in case you forgot to keep counting. Or sorry, White was up a pawn in case you forgot to keep counting. But Black has been the one putting pressure on all the right points for the last several moves. So let's point out a fun line as well real quick, just because it's always fun to say that, okay, if the move rook takes a6 had been played a little bit earlier in the line that was occurring with queen takes b4, then queen to d2 check, and then rook a6 tries to deflect the rook off the back rank to get a checkmate. So I just want to show there are some weird threats for Black in this position that don't make it very easy. So instead, after rook a1, g4 was played. That whole line occurs if Black chooses to play the move rook to d6 and come around, sort of inviting the temptation of this. So it is possible that was a way for Aronian to play for a win, invite the temptation, give a little check, do a little dance on a6, and maybe make a little love on queen to d1 checkmate. So remember that. Obviously, if you're an Aronian fan, there's a chance he might have had. But after g4 and the rook swings, it's hard to say he shouldn't have been thrilled about this position. I wouldn't want to be White here. As I tweeted during the round, I said, I can't even pay attention to this position because it's hurting my head. I got to get back to regular Chess.com work. The position just was a total mess, but in the end, of course, you can check out all the analysis over at the full news report. It seems like Fabiano was holding pretty accurately without any huge improvements for Aronian. He decides he doesn't just want to play tickle and draw right away with the queen checks. He decides he's going to go for it with h2, but White's able to simplify into the rook ending, and there's really not enough for either side to play for a win here, as all the pawns are falling. The point is, if Black takes it, this pawn runs. If Black goes for here, this pawn runs. And if the rook tries to do any of his own aggressive intentions, this pawn hangs. So in the end, they repeated a few times, eventually agreed to a draw in this position. So a balanced affair of some back and forth chess. I think that with Caruana being better with that good knight versus bad bishop position. I thought white was going to be the one squeezing. You know, he almost had a reversal of roles like yesterday, right, where Aronian lost to Svidler in round 10, or sorry, round 11, because he pushed a position too far. Caruana didn't go that far, so a very good save for him once his king got in trouble with all this black queen counterplay. But still, the draw keeps both players in contention as we move into the last couple rounds. They can't be too upset, and with that, we're going to move on to our next game, which I believe is the game that we had planned between Svidler and Giri. So let's go ahead and take a look at that right now. I bet you can't guess the opening before I show you the first move. Just kidding. Another English, right? We've had a lot of these. The English is topical. It's back. The Renaissance continues. Or the revolution, depending on your perspective. But okay, we have at this point, at least the first time I think we've seen this line of the mainline English here, I think, although there's been a lot of games, so don't hold it against me if I'm wrong. But I'm pretty sure this is the first time we've seen this one, and this is one of the more fun ones. I play this position for black often in Blitz on Chess.com because it's a fun position for both sides to play. Essentially, what you have is a reverse open Sicilian. If you can imagine e4, c5, knight f3 for white, the knight comes to c6, you get the d pawn traded for the c pawn. Well, in these cases, you have the same structure where the d-pawn gets traded for the c-pawn, but the colors are reversed. And after bishop g2, knight b6, you'd think that, well, if the Sicilian is such a good dynamic opening for black, why would black ever want to go to it, you know, down a tempo and play the white side? Well, black's goals are a little bit different. He's not trying to be super aggressive with a lot of these lines, and there are decent ways to play against the dragon setup anyway, with classical pressure on the d-file, Marco Hop ideas where the knight comes to d4. So it's not just that black and white that it's a reverse, or it is black and white, chess reference, but it's not that simple that white is just better in this sort of reverse Sicilian structure. But after castles, bishop e7, a3, this is all just straightforward theory here. Again, it's exactly the way you would imagine someone playing the black side of a dragon Sicilian, using the pawn storm and the minority attack combined with the power of this bishop eventually. You know exactly the kind of tactics white wants. Bishop to e6, rook to b1, and then f6. This is exactly the way you would think to play as black now, too. You're supporting this pawn, which is going to give you opportunities to put that pony on d4 so that they can't take on e5. And you'd like to just play some solid moves here. You know, you'd like to play queen d7 and put the rook on d8. In some cases, black will play for a5 and try to undermine the overextended pawns that have moved themselves so quickly. Just typical stuff. d3, and there we see a5, and after b5, knight to d4, this is pretty much exactly as I've been foreshadowing the position should be played. Why is this trade often something that black invites? Well, I'll just show you real quick that if this exact structure occurs, even though black doesn't have anything going on the e-file immediately, the long-term strategical aspects of this position are that black can normally get some pressure against the e2 pawn. It's called a Marco Hop. The idea is that you put the knight there, often works against a Maroczy bind. I think that's why it's called the Marco Hop, although I'm not a naming expert. But the point is black will get pressure on the e-file against this backward e-pawn, and if the pawn ever moves, we can en passant, and then the d-pawn becomes weak. So it's just good to understand the evolution of what both sides are playing for here. And that's why white, it doesn't take there normally. Here plays knight to d2. Queen to c8, of course, to guard the b7 pawn. After e3, knight f5, queen c2, all typical stuff. a4 is a very normal move. The last time this position was played, or at least one of the games we quoted in the analysis, was rook to d8, which hits the d3 pawn, so makes sense. After rook to d1, knight to d6, this was the game between Buhong Shi and Maltikov from the Ningbo Masters in 2015. So it went like this, and I think the position is just about roughly equal here. So nothing spectacular, but just give you another idea of some of the ways that this position is played. But Giri played a4, and after rook to d1, knight to d6, he's saying, I want to play for more aggressive play on the queen side, not wasting any time trying to put pressure here. The knight comes to e4, we get a big trade, and after bishop d5, knight c5, more pieces coming off the board. At first, I felt like that should mean that White is improving his chances to just focus on the backward c-pawn. If we talked about the Marco hop being a position that focuses on the backward e-pawn with the file, one of the common Sicilian ideas, even though this is for White, is for White to clear the way on the c-file and put pressure on the backward pawn. And even though I think that is a potentially critical factor, Giri was able to use the minor piece exchanges to his own advantage and flip the script by putting pressure on the d3 pawn anyway, even though right now it doesn't look like Black is in any position to do it. Here's how he did it. He traded and then used tactics to his favor. If you want to pause the video and ask yourself, you have less space as Black. It seems like White is the one with all the pressure on the c7 pawn, right? And you don't have any concrete ways to create threats, both against the d pawn and the open king. But using concrete calculation, you can quickly improve Black's position here with a move that maybe you're not going to consider right away. I'm giving you clues because I like to help you get better at chess. Believe it or not, that's my goal, not just awkward jokes. Have you paused the video? Okay, the move played by Giri was queen to e6. Not even given an exclamation point, but from my perspective, as far as how I just explained the balance of the philosophical differences here, you can understand why it's a powerful move. Black is coordinating in one move, preparing to bring pieces to the d-file and putting the queen on an active place that might access some light squares. The only reason why it shouldn't work is if White can take on c7. But of course, you can't. After knight to d5 with tempo, followed by bringing the rook to c8 with tempo, Black's going to put the pony on c3 and win the exchange. So when you can justify active moves with tactics, you should normally look for it. But even more importantly, sometimes we don't look for moves like that when we don't understand the strategical importance of coordinating our pieces so we can get pressure. That's why I always say tactics are the servant of strategy, right? Botvinnik's old saying, not the other way around. Tactics serve strategy when you understand the right strategical goal, which is that Black doesn't want to get grinded here on the c-file and needs to get pressure to have equal counterplay. Then you start looking for tactics to make it work, right? I used to say, make it work, designers. Hashtag Tim Gunn, hashtag Project Runway, hashtag my wife makes me watch that show, hashtag I'm not happy about it. Anyway, make it work, designers. As Tim Gunn would say, you can make tactics work for you when you understand what your goals are. If you don't understand the positions you're playing, you're not going to spend a bunch of time trying to make a tactic work for you because it's not that important to you. You don't get it. You don't understand the goal that you should be playing for. So that's why I'm always a big fan of don't just convince yourself chess is all tactics or all strategy. The balance, right? The synchronization, right? The synergy is what makes a strong chess player. So queen to e6 is a very good move by Giri, and already Svidler starts to maybe not make the most accurate moves. He played the move bishop to b2. Probably the move he should have played for was e4 immediately. One of the key points is that f5 can be met by bishop to b2 now, and with the e5 pawn coming under fire, Black has to deal with it. He has to deal with the e5 pawn coming under fire, and the c7 pawn is still under the shooting range of the queen because the c3 square is now guarded, right? There's no longer any of these knight d5 things. So if he's not going to play f5 after e4, what's the idea? Well, not only have we guarded d5, so we're renewing the threat on c7, but we might also put the bishop on e3 and let the bishop work over here instead of in the game where the bishop was kind of on a useless diagonal. So Svidler said himself that he should have played e4. Instead, he played bishop to b2. After rook f7, bishop c3, kind of took this slower approach. And all of a sudden, the thing that we said wasn't the case before, where Black was the one worried about this and had no pressure here. Well, reevaluate and take stock in the position and tell me what's just happened over the last few moves with White playing a little bit of a bishop journey. What is he, Frodo, taking the ring to Mordor? Let's get a life, dude, because Black is the one with all the pressure now. And White doesn't have any clear plans. E4 was played to keep the knight out of d5, but here the counterplay can come because it isn't easy for White to go back and try to target the e5 pawn. Note that, of course, rook takes d3 would be a huge blunder because you can take, and then shake and bake on f8, right? So don't ever mate yourself. Pro tip from Papa Bear. Instead, f5 is played, and after takes f5, queen f5, rook e1. Now, Svidler actually finds his way here to trade off this weakness for another weakness, and from that perspective, it makes you wonder if Giri should have played slower moves like h6, take away the threat of checkmate, renew the threat of rook takes d3. That might have been the better way to sort of build on the position, but he didn't. He played f5, and after takes rook e1, plays knight to d5, makes sense. Svidler said at this point he kind of realized that he had lost control, lost his threat on the structure. Rook f7 is played, unpinning the knight, hitting f2. All things are kind of looking good for black. h6 is played. Now, h6 is the move I said maybe he should have played before f5, and that's how I would have played it. But again here, and I'm not trying to beat the dead drum of Giri's inability to convert on advantages, but I felt like, again, he goes for the feeling comfortable human way to keep the pressure. There was more of a concrete way here to, I think, convert on the advantage just by taking on b4. After queen takes, we can play rook d4 and then queen f3 check. And once king g1 is played, the big trade is going to lose not just the d3 pawn for e5, but the a3 pawn as well. And it feels like this a pawn is a hop, skip, and a jump away from cramping white's style. And so if the other option too that I analyze is rook takes d3 instead of taking on or playing queen f3 check, and even that looks weird because if the only move is king h3 due to the fact that you get mated on the first rank, I mean, I know the computer actually says this position is equal, but I'm frightened to be white, and I don't buy it, all right? Computers can play equal, but humans lose those positions with the king on h3. So, seems like Giri might have missed his chance to be more concrete, but after h6, queen e4, Svidler finds the way to simplify as best he can. Yes, he loses this pawn, and yes, the d3 pawn is likely to follow, but simplifying into the endgame really challenges Giri to find the most accurate moves, otherwise Svidler's going to hold. He hopes to just win as many pawns as he can for the pawns he knows he's going to lose and draw the rook ending. There's some tricky points in the analysis there, but again, review the finer points over at Chess.com's news report. After takes, of course, Svidler plays f4 to avoid the threat of rook to d2. You know, a line that might show that is something like rook takes a4, rook d2. Now you have to play rook f4 to block me from just going to town over here. And this endgame is probably better for black with so many weaknesses. Maybe white has drawing chances, but why risk it? So f4 is understandable, although I analyzed rook e3, and I'm not sure this wasn't Svidler's most accurate way to draw, but I digress, and let's focus on f4 as was played by Svidler, because once he gets this counterplay, it also seemed like an effective enough way to draw. He points out the fact that as long as his king isn't getting mated on g4, then probably this one c-pawn is not going to be enough. Although a good line to note is that if you go rook a to a7, which looks like the simplest way to take care of things, here the move h5 is very nice. And suddenly with the g-pawn falling, it's really clear that this one pawn is much better than this one pawn, and black might actually win this one. So rook a to a7 doesn't work, but of course Svidler didn't go for that. He played rook a8 check and then to the 8th rank. Now I should point out that h5 check would actually lose on the spot because here you've checkmated yourself, so don't do that with the rooks on the 8th rank. But of course, rook c4 was played instead. There's not a draw quite yet, especially after rook f8. Svidler said he should have played rook to e8, which I agree with, and that likely would have led to a line like this where the black king can simply not escape perpetual checks. But I'm not sure I really give Giri that many winning chances here either. Taking off a single pair of rooks is probably never going to increase black's winning chances. And after what happened in the game, again, white was able to keep enough counterplay, enough activity with the rooks. h4 was a nice move. It's the last chance to separate these pawns and try to pick them off. But as long as Svidler doesn't make the huge mistake of keeping the king too active, it's a good lesson. Just because the king is visually active doesn't mean it's in the right position, right? Because if you do this, black could take this, and the king is actually blocking the counterplay you need. So remember that. Don't just ever make assumptions like active king always better. Svidler played king to d3, which is the best move, and now gets the counterplay he needs, and actually goes on to draw this after some tickle with the rooks. Nothing like nothing like a good king and rook tickle. Just attack each other, but the big point of this position, I'll just show you. The rook can never take this one because this guy hangs. The king can never take this one because this guy hangs. And as long as this king stays in the general vicinity of these squares, the king is going to be close enough to draw against either pawn. And that's basically what happened. We'll make a few more moves to show that eventually Giri was forced to make the decision of, with white's king getting active, of either go after the g-pawn and lose the c-pawn or keep checking from now until kingdom come. The game was a draw. The draw artist continues. Right now, you just got to be hoping that he finishes with 14 draws because it would be so epic to remember that Candidates where Anish Giri drew 14 games. Yeah, bro, I remember it. I was like, 29 years old, man, and I was just, hanging out, and there was this wave coming in, man, and then Giri came over it and said, I'm going to draw every game, and I was like, whoa. I don't know where that came from, Counter Reeves. Let's move on to the next game. in what was surely his best game of the tournament so far. Hikaru Nakamura took down Vishy with the white pieces. Of course, you already know, as I foreshadowed it, that it was a huge game. It makes you wonder if the American had started off on a little bit better foot, right? Not blundered against Karjakin early with that horrible knight sacrifice and not touched the king and tried to claim Jadu. Where would he be in the standings? Because this was a game that he won, despite what the critics said afterwards, that Vishy kind of beat himself. The truth is, this was a game won by Nakamura because of very good preparation. This is, once again, a topical English, right? Shouldn't surprise you. We actually have the same line that was repeated, that was played in the game between Topalov and Aronian, if you remember the game that Aronian won as black. After d6, of course, Topalov took on b4, and if you would like me to remind you of that game, I'll do it, just because I love you. I love you guys so much. Knight takes a3 there, d3. This line happened, and of course, we remember Aronian getting compensation, and Aronian winning the pawn, and Topalov just not getting enough compensation here as white. And so Nakamura does not plan on repeating that effort, and rather than taking on b4, he plays the move a3, which of course is also a very common move. I think it was actually a move that I said in that video would be maybe white's main approach if it turns out knight takes b4 wasn't so good because of Aronian's brilliant victory as black. Not trying to toot my own horn. I'm just saying that we've been into so much in-depth analysis of these games. It's kind of cool to see as the tournament goes on when some of that stuff repeats itself and you end up, kind of being on track with your evaluation. So I think a3 is where white needs to focus, and after the move bishop to c5 is played castles, rook e8. Here's where we get our fun novelty that Nakamura admits was sort of a gamble. The main move in the position is b4, and I guess I'll just show you. After b4, bishop d4, rook to b1, knight e7. The position is a little bit of a mess. White has a small edge because of the bishop pair, and but the theory's been tested a lot. After c5, knight b to d5, it's unclear. I'm sure Anand was ready to play this position, as Hikaru would be too, but Hikaru had something new in mind and some aggressive intentions behind e3, which again, he admitted was kind of a gamble based on whether or not Vishy had this prepared. Why is it a gamble, and why does white normally need to play the more forcing move? Well, if you take a moment to think about white's position here, do you notice anything about a piece being on the edge of the board? Ding, 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 ding. That's a knight that's actually trapped after black plays the move g5. So Anand goes right forward. Whether he knew the prep or not, most likely he didn't because he lost this game very quickly. G5 makes a lot of sense, and it is the most testing move. And as Nakamura revealed, G5 is actually the correct move. It's just that with Anand not being prepared, it was very difficult for him to continue to find the computer's best moves. The moment he played his first human move after B4 is the moment Anand might have already been lost. So I just want to clarify that because there were a lot of people on Twitter sort of hating on Anand, saying that he just played a bad game and beat himself. I think Nakamura deserves a lot of credit, and also it's hard to beat up Anand for not finding all the engine best moves when he didn't have it prepared ahead of time. So in this position, if you want to pause and see what you would play, it is a counterintuitive thing to do, but the best thing for black is g takes h4, saying, all right, I'm not just going to try to win the piece, I'm going to let you trade. After bishop to b2, white, of course, trying to keep the sacrifice going. Knight takes d5, cd5, knight e5 takes. The key line is after white wins back the piece, black has bishop to g4, followed by inserting the knight into f3. And as Hikaru said, this position is probably about equal. White getting lots of dark square attacking chances, black having chances here. I personally kind of prefer white, and I don't have a whole bunch of time to test Hikaru's prep. Maybe he's just saying it's equal so he can get someone to go for it again and he'll win. I don't know. But I doubt it. I think it's probably close to equal. But those are hard moves to play, especially g takes h4 for Anand when it feels like you're going to win a piece if you play bishop to b6, and that's what he did. But it was the first human move, and he might have already been lost in this position after move 11. Bishop to b2 is played, the natural move that increases the pressure on the diagonal. And after chop down, we start to realize that white's pressure is not a joke here, and this pawn wishes it could go back. There's a whole lot of analysis here. I suggest you check out the game over at the news report. I'm going to try to show you everything I can. Anand played the move knight to d4 as a mean to disrupt the diagonal. Knight e5 is also a move that kind of makes sense. But after f4, knight to c4, and then takes g5, we see some real fun stuff on queen to h5 because this pawn is under fire and it's not easy to defend it. Moves like queen to d7 are met by bishop to h3. trying to force the queen out. And then if the queen goes to e7, we have access into squares like f5 and f6. So this was really dangerous. And again, you can understand trying to solve this over the board against somebody who probably had an engine at their side when they created it. Kind of not a fair fight, right? So obviously he didn't want to go for knight e5. If he had taken h4, again, we see take c6 and then queen h5. And if black is not even up a piece here, only a pawn, there's no way you're happy with black's position. So that makes sense. So again, he played knight to d4, but now the move that really shows that the Hikaru prep went deep. You can take here, but then I take here, and your bishop is closed, right? If you take, we take, and probably white has a tiny edge, but with the closed diagonal, white has nothing special. To show that this was a prepared position, you know this move was just brilliant. d3. You build on the tension, you force more diagonals to become open, and you say, no, I'm not just going to gobble up your piece. After g takes h4, he takes e4. You don't go for moves like this unless you're confident in white's long-term attacking chances. A very, very nice attack is about to ensue. And after knight to e6 takes the piece back, followed by opening of the position, the truth is that black was already just completely busted here. This king is not going to survive the coming onslaught on the critical squares. After h5, rook to d1, why not take away another defender? Rook to d5. Queen e7, here comes the queen swinging over as well. Just everybody and their cousin is having a party over here. And it's like when you invite a couple friends in and then all of a sudden the entire high school shows up and then your parents come back to dinner. Not the kind of party you want. Rook to g6, rook e5, queen d6, bishop e4. Too much pressure. And Vishy just resigned right here. He's losing the exchange and probably getting mated to go with it. So funny, our quickest review so far of the day today, but mainly because Hikaru just came ready to play. Right, that was ninja preparation right there, and he took Vishy down in a very, very nice win. A game that may cost Vishy the candidates, may help win the candidates for his countrymen, that being Hikaru Nakamura, if Fabiano holds on. But, who knows what's going to happen there. Very nice win, a game that will affect the future of this line in the English theory. And that's what happens when big guns bring out their big preparation. So before we do anything else, let's move on to our game of the day between Sergey Karjakin and Veselin Topalov. And of course, before we jump in, if I gave this guy any more love, Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, I'd probably have to marry him or at least buy him dinner, right? So we know that MVL is just totally kicking booty over there with his game of the day analysis at the news reports and helping me look smarter than I am in what is usually the most complicated game of the day. So after the Najdorf was played, MVL was hilarious today, just celebrating over the fact that he finally got a Najdorf. If you don't know, he's probably the world's leading expert on the Najdorf, to be honest. And he was joking that he had spent so much time with these long endings, he was tired of it. If you're not following me on Twitter, you should be, or you should be following Maxime on Twitter because that's where a lot of these funny conversations are taking place. Or anyway, so H3 is played. If you're not aware, this is actually the same line I just played against the world in the game that is going on, Master versus Many. On Chess.com, we have this once a month Master versus Many, where an international and grandmaster takes on the whole world of Chess.com. Anyone who wants to play, it's free. You can join. Just click right here, and you can actually go join the game. And I played the H3 line with the intention of repeating Veselin Topalov's win. Maxime Vachier-Lagrave's win over Veselin Topalov from the London Chess Classic just this last December 2015. I messed up the line, but in this game, we didn't even get a chance for it because Black played the much less common E6. Instead of e5. It's possible that Veselin did that exactly because he still doesn't have an improvement over his loss to MVL from the London Chess Classic. After knight d to e2, normally Black plays h5 to stop g4, and we're not going to get into a whole Najdorf theory lesson, but I encourage you to go check out the videos, the Master versus Many videos and the analysis there, and of course you can check out MVL's win over Topalov from the London Classic. But, okay, e6 was played. And after g4, knight voluntarily comes to d7, bishop e3, the game is on. This is going to be a Najdorf English attack style position. No, it's not a traditional English attack, but if we're summarizing what both sides are playing for here, it's pretty clear. Black is going to want to get all the play that he can on the queen side. The reason for the voluntary knight retreat is so that often the ponies can find themselves working together in one way or another heading into the c4 square. Also, it avoids the tempos here and opens up the bishop. I just want to make sure everyone understands all the moves that have been played. White's moves, of course, also make nothing but sense, right? We're in a bunch of captain obvious moves here. Just bring the pieces out, get castled long, and go for Cecchino the Schlamba. After g5 is played, normally White is just trying to prevent immediate counterplay and pointing out that taking g5 is often not the best idea because of the weakness it creates in Black's position and because it opens the g file. So b5 was played, a3, bishop b7, now h4. Castles, knight to b6 right away is also a move. Queen to d2, and then now after knight to b6, I think it was an official novelty, but again, Maxim's analysis was very complicated. I went through it for a while. I don't remember for sure, but I will give you the philosophical point behind knight b6, which is probably more important for most of the viewers. The knight wants to head into c4, but you don't want to allow White to gain the tempo of f4, hitting the knight on e5 before you're ready to put the pony on c4. So, for example, with knight to b6, we're preparing to play knight to d7 and knight to e5 so that when f4 comes, now we put a knight on c4 and we end up replacing a knight with a knight where we can still apply the fork down to the queen and bishop here and keep the pony putting pressure on the queen side. Little things like this are what separate, the men from the boys in these very sharp open Sicilians. Don't just put your pieces on squares that you think you saw a grandmaster do. Understand the philosophy behind each one of those moves, so that if theory changes just a little bit, you're not totally thrown off by one move order. You still understand the ultimate goal and where and why the pieces need to be where they go. So that's the idea behind knight to b6. MVL analyzes the knight to c6 is also a move, but just to show you, usually in a position like this, it's an improvement for White, especially when the pawn storm is so far advanced. So I tend to agree with him that wouldn't be the biggest improvement for Black. So knight to b6 is played, we get h5, and here comes knight e5, and now g6. Notice that Karjakin is not in the mood to castle long and let Black be as comfortable developing his attack as he is developing his. And g6, of course, is just a very common structural break here. The main point is that e6 is under fire. Don't ever forget that you have to watch out for this move. Black would love to take it, but only once opens the h-file, and as we already said, twice opens e6. So this is normal stuff. Black continues with his own attack, which is proper. And after castles long, knight b to c4, bishop takes c4, knight c4. Black is getting what he wanted, but White never even wasted the idea of f4, understanding that the more critical threat to make is actually every opportunity to open up the files on the king side. Just playing f4 because it gains space and makes you feel warm and cozy, if you have all the time in the world, it can't be bad, right? It will help increase the attack, but not something that's critical for White's position, and something that didn't get talked about, I don't think in the post-game commentary, or I'm not even sure in Maxim's analysis, is that there's a very good chance this position was still all prep for Karjakin. I mean, the 6h3 Najdorf line is a very topical one, and if he wasn't prepared to play the way Maxim did when he beat Veselin, sure, he would expect e6 to come if you're Karjakin. So in one of the earlier round videos, I talked about how deep Karjakin's preparation has been in this tournament, how impressive he was in all those Queen's Indians, and I wouldn't be surprised if he won this game based on a lot of prep as well. Now, if Black had played the move bishop to f6 here, the position still looks to be a little crazy. White will now take the time to play f4 because the bishop is a solid defensive piece who we kind of want to go after. And after rook to c8, rook h3, prophylaxis, killed the cat. Always defend on that side of the board if you can. Black has e5. Surprisingly, this position is kind of unclear. Don't believe me? Maxime Vachier-Lagrave thinks so, and he knows more Najdorf than all of us combined. I think the reason is that even with the move knight f5, Black has already established his own potential for counterplay on the queen side, and there aren't a lot of concrete moves for White to just blow open things. All these moves that have been hanging for a while don't do a ton to help your position. And I'm going to back up and prove that point in a second. But if you take with White, often they'll sit here on h8 and use the umbrella method. That pawn will be a defender. If you take here, you're bringing in the rook to not only defend, but maybe swing over to this side of town. So it's not that clear. I think White still holds a small edge, but bishop f6 was certainly the much better move. The move rook to c8 was played and met by a very strong move as White that Maxime jokingly didn't give any commentary to, even though I think for most people who don't understand these positions, it was something worthy of explanation. But it's such a typical idea and one that we've seen just take an absolute wrecking ball to the black king side that there's no way Topalov should have missed it. So he gave rook to c8 2 question marks for black. A little harsh by MBL, but it's because he just completely overlooks the very powerful threat of h6 coming. There was a game first played by Anand over Timon in a win in the Taimanov English attack, I remember, that changed my perspective. If we talk about STEM games, remembering great wins by great players and the openings that you play as a means to build on them to improve your own knowledge. Remember that. Those are the things you should be doing. That was a STEM game for me, and it really cemented this idea where the pawns just go like kamikaze pilots toward the king side, and black has no options. So let me prove it to you. If you take here first and then play h6, you know how he deals with it? g6, and these pawns are serving as umbrellas. Well, if you take here first and then play h6, g6, and maybe the pawn isn't an umbrella, but we can already see that black is a lot more solid in this position. And even this pawn, after rook takes, is just not nearly as attractive as you would think, because if it's just a pawn, then you're losing sight of what you need to do, which is tempi against the king before they do tempi against you, especially without a light square bishop on this diagonal. So white doesn't have any other concrete way to do it. But h6, on the other hand, it delivers exactly what white needs in the position. Sorry, not after bishop f6, after rook c8, of course. Rook to c8 and h6. h6, on the other hand, now look at the difference. Now if you take it, I take, and there's no umbrella method for you because I'm busting through here very quickly. In fact, if you take it, I don't even have to take here. I can immediately start pounding through with rook takes, with bishop takes, with queen h5. So I'm forcing lines to become open. When the kings are on opposite sides of the board, the ability to make threats is by far more important than the small amount of material you had to lose to get those threats. I'm not giving you a license to sack your queen, but just remember that. And that's what h6 proves. It's a very pretty position. If you take this way, now I take here, and again, there's no umbrella method because I have the h-file open. I have tactics coming here exactly as I need, and black's in big trouble. So, interestingly enough, again, if you take and then play h6, they can blockade it. If you play h6 right away, they can't blockade it. And it's fun, instructive, and something you should commit to memory. So after h6 was played, f takes g6 was not played. Getting back to the main line, h takes g6 was played, I believe. And trying to get to all of the analysis here. H takes g6 was played. After takes king g6, no, that would have been losing immediately because I win the exchange and grab the h file. Sorry, attempting to come back here to what the main line was here for black, because I've spent a lot of time analyzing the position and now I've lost my way. And here we go. We get back. Nope, also not the main line, but another good example of why white would be winning and crushing through. So always instructive. Instead, we get to the position that occurs with, I know I'm stuttering here. I should probably just pause and go back, and that's what I'm going to do in just a moment here so I can make sure I have the line prepared. And the good thing is it was what we thought. He did take here and have to allow knight takes e6, but I lost track, I'm sorry, because of all the complex variations analyzed and contributed by MVL, remembering exactly how white won. But the most instructive points of how the pawn structure has been executed to perfection on the king side have kind of already been made. So again, if you don't take it, white's going to blow open everything and checkmate you. So black gives up the exchange and hopes to hold the position, but after h takes bishop to d4, white is already kind of on the route here, right? The route is on. He wants to simplify, take away counterplay, and he's up the exchange. So after a5, bishop takes g7 was played. Probably the most accurate win, actually, for Karjakin was knight to d5. A cool line that MVL showed goes like this, where the counterplay fails because after check, the king moves. We remove the queen from this threat of discovered check and actually just sacrifice the knight and take on h7, and the game is completely over. White's just winning. But knight to d5 was not found or calculated properly by Karjakin, so instead he played bishop takes g7. Queen came to g4, rook e8, and now queen to g5. Also pretty straightforward stuff. Bishop c6, again, as I said, he wants to simplify. That's going to be the easiest way to use what was a great English attack converted to a material advantage. Get the pieces off the board, right? Queen to h8, b3, Knight takes a3. Yes, knight e5 was possible, but rook takes d6 comes, and the point is there's all kinds of pressure here that black just has a hard time dealing with any move. So he took a3 with the hope for some attacking chances here. But now on rook h3, bishop d7, rook g3, we're already getting into a position where we're going to renew threats on g6. Queen f6, rook h1, rook e7, the queen comes back. A very nice, if you're not going to simplify, you're only going to let my queen improve herself. Topalov makes the practical decision not to simplify, but here we go. Knight to d5, a very strong move. This check leads to nothing but a check. King d2, queen d4 check, and then rook to d3, where the queen guards f2, and black can resign. Love it when everybody works together, don't we? Good teamwork. So instead, rook f7 falls to queen d8 check. The queen switches, and black simply resigns on queen to c3, not because the pony is trapped, but actually because we have a very strong threat here. If you want to pause your video and play a little daily puzzle action one more time, you can. That move is, we'll just make some move here, the threat of rook takes g6. Chekaruski, Chekalina Lashlamba, you can pick your flavor, strawberry or raspberry, and white goes on to win. So a huge win right there for Sergey Karjakin, a game that, again, I can't really say how far it was prepped, but the g6, h6 approach as MVO was just very disappointed in Topalov's play. Just crushed black. I apologize for my misstep there, but let's not focus on the past. Let's focus on the future and jump in here to the standings update. We see Sergey Karjakin back tied atop the leaderboard with Fabiano Caruana. Many people are asking what happens if they tie. Well, you should watch Chess Center this week on Chess.com to find out, as Peter Dawkers explains exactly how the tie breaks work. But then you have Vishy Anand, who's still not out of it yet. If he can win his white against Giri in round 13, in the final round, Anand has black against Svidler, which doesn't seem great, but Anand has a +7 record against Svidler, so don't count Vishy out. All kinds of craziness. Who knows if Nakamura can pull off a win against Topalov? Who knows who could be in it in the end? I think most likely we're going to see it come down to the round 14 matchup between Karjakin and Caruana, but we're going to get to that when we get to it. Enjoy the rest day, fans. Look for the next round to take place, round 13 on March 27th. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please subscribe. Please share it with your friends, and we'll see you on Chess.com.